Welcome to a short preview of this Screencasts Online video tutorial.
In this week's tutorial, I'd like to help you solve a few problems. We communicate with others over the internet more than ever before, using cloud services for storage of data, and email and text messaging and websites to transfer information between each other. This creates two problems to be solved. One is how to bundle up a big pile of documents, and another is how to ensure that those very same documents are safe from prying eyes. In the weekly tip video 722, Don taught us how to create a secure disk image using Apple's built-in disk utility. This method is fantastic to store your personal documents on a cloud service, as he demonstrated for us. But sharing with others, you're probably going to want to use some different methods. You might also want to compress your files for transfer and storage. And people may send you files in a variety of different compression formats, and you need to have a way to extract them. Let's take a step back and walk through three different concepts and how the available formats fit into them. After that, we'll take a look at a built-in option to provide some of these capabilities, and then I'm going to show you a sweet little $2 app called Keka that will do it all for you in a nice GUI interface. The first concept is compression. When done properly, this can reduce file sizes in a way that doesn't reduce quality. This will help save disk space for yourself and for others, and it can reduce the bandwidth to send and receive files. Using lossless compression, you can encode information with fewer bits than the original, but you have no loss of data when uncompressed. Turns out you can compress either individual files or entire folders. Whether you're compressing a single file or a bunch of files in a folder, when you're done compressing, you will have a single file to send someone, which is much better than sending somebody a big pile of separate documents. Some file formats compress better than others. For example, documents, text files, bitmap images, and certain audio and video formats such as WAV and MPEG compress very well. Other file formats, such as JPEG images and MP3 audio files, are already compressed, so if you run them through compression, you may actually have problems with it, and they could actually increase in size. The next concept is archive. An archive file is a file that is composed of one or more computer files that maintains the directory structure if it's a folder or with lots of subfolders. Archive files are used to collect multiple data files together into a single file for easier portability and storage. The final concept is encryption. An encrypted file or folder is one that has been secured with a password, hopefully using current industry standards. Some of the older encryption standards are no longer viable because they've been cracked. Now, perhaps you're not a government spy or a dissident against a totalitarian regime, or maybe you are, but everyone needs encryption from time to time. A couple of examples might be sending personal documents to a lawyer or to a financial institution, or maybe you want to send your estate planning documents to your children. Perhaps you want to put your personal data on a cloud service like Dropbox or OneDrive or Google Drive, and you don't trust them to protect your data.
That's just a quick preview of one of this week's Apple-related tutorials from Screencasts Online. Screencasts Online is your premium source of Apple-related video tutorials. All of our members get access to brand new, up-to-date tutorials each week, as well as unlimited access to our entire video archive full of Mac and iOS related tutorials. You can stream and download all of our videos on your Mac, iPad and iPhone, and even your Apple TV using the members-only Screencasts Online Apple TV app. Membership also includes a complimentary subscription to the digital Screencasts Online monthly magazine, published each month and packed with videos, articles, reviews, as well as hints and tips covering all aspects of the Mac, iPad, iPhone, and all of the other fantastic Apple products. So, if you're ready to start getting the most out of your Apple devices, visit screencastsonline.com today and become a Screencasts Online member.